Now, Sports Talk with Brodes. Here's Hunter Brody.
Before we start this podcast, I want to let everyone know that I am doing a giveaway to celebrate Daryl Morey being hired as the president of basketball operations. All you need to do is go to my Twitter, @Brodes81, and go retweet my pinned tweet and follow me. That's it. It's so simple. Go check that out for a chance to win a 76ers 47 hat. What is going on, everyone? Welcome to Sports Talk with Brodes. As always, we are broadcasting live from the outstanding, the beautiful Manscaped Man Cave. You get 20% off and free shipping with the code BROD at manscaped.com. You can't beat that deal. Now, let's talk about what I heard today. Woj was on 97.5 The Fanatic on their midday show with Anthony Gargano. And he had so many interesting things to say, I cut up the audio so we will react. He talked about, well, of course, the Daryl Morey hire, the Doc Rivers hire, the coaching staff as a whole, what they did when it comes to the identity of the organization, Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, Al Horford, the roster. I loved it. I loved every single minute of the discussion, and I can't wait to dive into what he had to say. And I think it's very important to start here. Listen to the way that he uses the word dramatic.
Across the board, it's a dramatic transformation for the organization. You mentioned, obviously, the hiring of Doc Rivers and now Daryl Morey coming in to run the entire basketball operation.
Look, I know it sounds simple. Brodes, obviously, that's an obvious statement. Obviously, this was a dramatic change from a franchise standpoint. And I just feel it can't be stressed enough. What they have done from top to bottom was huge. And I was someone that, I wasn't this Brett Brown hater. A lot of people thought the issues with the 76ers were Brett Brown's fault. And it went so much deeper. It went so much higher up than Brett Brown. While the end of Brett Brown, it was ugly. You get swept by the Celtics. We all know how it went. It needed to happen. The coaching change was inevitable. The time ran out, and it was time. It was the proper time for the front office to say, we need to make sure we acquire somebody new because Brett Brown has been here for a long time, and clearly there is a disconnect between what the fan base wants at the moment, which is winning basketball, and what Brett Brown was able to provide in a role that an NBA coach can provide. I kept screaming, though, and I realized this as I was covering the 76ers for 97.3 ESPN, as I was going down to the Wells Fargo Center every night, as I was talking to more people involved and with more people who have been covering the team for years and years and years. There was so much dysfunction happening at the top. Well, guess what? That's where it begins. While Brett Brown was not the smoothest, he was the scapegoat, if you will. That spot needed to be changed. That head coaching spot needed a new identity, but there were so many bigger problems than just the X's and O's of the head coach and the culture of the head coach that needed to be addressed. And I need to credit Joshua Harris because during a pandemic, when they know next year is up in the air as well and they're going to be losing out on a ton of revenue when it comes to fans and people coming into the building next year, he went out and not only fired Brett Brown, which there are still years left on the deal, and we questioned if coaches would be getting fired in a year of a pandemic because these ownership groups still need to pay those coaches out. So fired Brett Brown, still money left on the contract, hired Doc Rivers, and I'm sure he spent a hefty penny on getting Daryl Morey because a lot of teams were in the mix. And same with Doc Rivers. And all these coaches who were high up on people's lists when it comes to head coaches. So Joshua Harris went out and rebranded everything, spent money to do it as well. And there's no way Daryl Morey came here and does not have the legitimate final say. Now, of course, the ownership group in every franchise has technically the last say, but giving Daryl Morey the keys essentially is what happened, and that makes me feel better than what was happening. I am still skeptical of Daryl Morey because he hasn't been perfect throughout his career, and he does make a billion trades, and he does a lot to make sure that he acquires talent, and sometimes you can argue that it's over-aggressive, it's too much. But based off the fact that ownership and people who shouldn't be making basketball decisions were making basketball decisions, and they're passing up now, and they're handing it over to someone who has a ton of experience in this league, I need to give them credit. But going back to the cut, dramatic. Hearing the word dramatic, it's the right word to use, it's a proper word to use, and it's a very important thing to say based off the fact that this team needed to do this. Needed to! Or they were going to be insanely stuck in a bad spot. The alternative, though, of that statement, they could still be stuck in a spot. We don't know. Only time will tell. But they are, without hindsight, they are built way better than what they were before. Does that automatically result in success? No, not necessarily. But right now, without hindsight, you got to look at what they have done this offseason and be extremely overwhelmed. I don't think you can even say that this is what I expected, and I'm just average, I'm just even, I'm just at the playing field, even playing field, because I expected them to have this type of offseason. There's no way. There's no person in hell who would thought that this would be the case. And these guys kind of fell on their lap. We didn't know if Doc Rivers was going to get fired. We didn't know Daryl Morey was going to leave the Houston Rockets. So these individuals fell on the Sixers' laps, and they took advantage of the opportunity and roped them in. And that's where I got to credit Harris for opening up the paybook, the checkbook, and paying these individuals. Now, I just mentioned we didn't know that Doc was going to get fired. Let's hear Woj explain why Doc did get fired.
It was just too difficult, given the expectations of that team. And Steve Ballmer had been there as owner for a couple of these 3-1 flameouts. They're hard to recover from. They can be hard to recover from for a coach. And I just think ultimately Steve Ballmer couldn't get over that loss. He couldn't get over 3-1, that 3-1 lead to Denver, losing that series. There was a lot of anticipation in that organization, in the city, that ultimately it would be Lakers-Clippers for a conference final. And I just don't think he got past that and made the change. And so,
and this is something I said when Doc Rivers was hired. I'm stoked with the hiring. I don't think you could have gotten anyone better when you look at what was available. I would have been okay with Ty Lue. I would have been okay with Doc Rivers. I didn't want D'Antoni. But when you look at what was available this offseason, you know what? Doc Rivers is a phenomenal hire. There is a respect level there, not only from a player standpoint, but from everybody around the NBA. He brings a different energy. There needed to be more accountability. He brings that. But there was the 3-1 series record on the resume. And it wasn't just once. It wasn't just twice. This happened a decent amount of time. And I always thought to myself, when all these Brett Brown haters were coming out, and they were freaking out, and they were screaming, and their faces were turning red, it was turning purple because they were so disgusted, and they were screaming, hollering to get this guy out of town, which I will always say it was time for him to leave. But during those years of frustration out of the Brett Brown haters, if there were 3-1 playoff series leads that were blown, you would never hear the end of it. He would be ridiculed 10 billion times worse than what he already was. And now you're bringing in a guy who blew 3-1 series leads multiple times. And it's not viewed the same way. And it's not looked at the same way. And this head coach isn't criticized the same way. Now, I think Doc Rivers is a better head coach than Brett Brown. I don't think anybody is trying to make that type of argument. But you know me, I always like to look at the psyche of people. Why do people think the way that they do? Well, why is it okay for Doc Rivers to do it, but if it was Brett Brown, yeah, right, good luck even walking in this town without a brown paper bag on your face so nobody knows that it's you so you don't get clocked and clobbered in the jaw. Because that's realistically what would have happened if Brett was walking down the city of Philadelphia if his resume was the same as Doc Rivers' resume was when it came to blowing all of those playoff leads. But that was something that I mentioned during the time of the hire. While a lot of people were hooting and hollering just from excitement, I thought, look at the resume. There's a reason why the guy got canned with a roster like Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. Now, I like the hire. I think this is a good step in the right direction for the Sixers. Is this the guy that's going to win them the championship? I don't know. This could be the guy that gets you to the guy that gets them to win the championship. This could be more of a stopgap to get Ben Simmons on the right path, to get Joel Embiid on the right path. Yes, Doc Rivers has won a championship. How long ago? 12 years ago? With one of the most historic Boston Celtics teams ever? With an obnoxious amount of talent? Hall of Fame level guys? Right? I don't know if that's what's here, but I do know that he will change the mentality and the work level of these players, and that is a big step in the right direction right now. I'm not trying to knock Doc Rivers, but I like to look at all of the directions when it comes to a specific conversation. So I give guys praise, and then I rip them apart because I don't think it's fair to just value what's great and not talk about what's bad, or I don't think it's fair to value what's horrendous about somebody and then not give them their credit when their credit is due when they do successful things. So Doc Rivers brings a lot to the table on the positive, but there are major flaws in his resume as well. Okay, let's talk about Daryl Morey and the roster.
What you'll never really hear from Daryl is talking about his culture, or I don't want to say he doesn't care about any of that, but he really doesn't care about any of that. He is going to gather talent, and that's always been his mission in Houston. And you look at all the big deals he was involved in, and he does a lot of small deals to try to build toward the big deals and getting the kinds of assets. But
all right, so with Daryl Morey, just like I did with Doc Rivers, there's going to be pros and there's going to be cons. This falls on one of the cons for me. So you heard Woj. He doesn't really care about culture. It's just about acquiring the talent. Well, that's great in theory, but you could be over-aggressive. You can go out and get the wrong guys. You can be so fascinated with an individual, you give up a lot to get them, and then you get screwed on the back end. So being obsessed with just going out and grabbing all that skill, doesn't that somewhat seem like what the Philadelphia 76ers has done to this point? Oh, Al Horford, let's bring him in. Oh, Josh Richardson, well, we're losing Jimmy Butler, let's bring him in. Oh, Al Horford. Oh, Tobias Harris. Like the names of these players. Oh, bring him in. Well, that hasn't really resulted in a ton of success. And there's been questions about Daryl Morey and the big man. Because Joel Embiid, clearly a big man, the Houston Rockets, they were playing Robert Covington.
Yeah, I would probably dispute the idea that he doesn't like bigs. I mean, he had a team. He was dying to trade for a star player and was able to get one in James Harden when he did the Oklahoma City trade. And that's the player they built around. So if you're going to have James Harden, you want to surround him with shooting. He draws a lot of attention and certainly is a great passer, great scorer, all of those things. And listen, they went harder after Dwight Howard in free agency, however many years ago that was. And that was an upset at the time to get him to leave the Lakers. Houston, whatever you think of Dwight and what it became for him,
sure.
At that time he was still considered a preeminent player. So I just think in Houston they decided to try to that they weren't going to outman that Golden State team in the West, but they said, let's see if we can find a style of play with Mike D'Antoni and Harden that just plays to a completely different strength. Yeah.
And that's important to me. I think the ending of that specifically stands out to me the most. So, look, they have a situation here where they did try the Dwight Howard thing, and people might laugh at Dwight Howard now, but he was at one point a star in this league, and he was a must-have. That was a big moment for that franchise. I don't think that he devalues the big man just because that's the road they went down in Houston. They tried something new. They went with a different identity. The Warriors are the Warriors. You can't really out-warrior the Warriors. Things are going to go in the wrong direction when you do that. You need to be yourself. You need to be unique, and you can be unique to try and counterpunch another opponent's strongest suits, and they did. They went with this whole new philosophy of not really having anyone big out on the court, really stretch the court out. I know that sounds similar to Golden State with all the three-point shooting, but there is a different vibe to what Houston did. I like the fact that he's willing to think out of the box. I like the fact that he's willing to try new things. Why keep going down the same road if that's not going to be beneficial? Why not get creative? Why not change and be completely different? Make others be on their toes. Hold on a second. What's Philadelphia doing? Hold on. What are the 76ers doing? I like the fact that you can adjust. You can make an adjustment. If adversity hits, okay, what can we do? What can our philosophy be? How can we counter some of these teams and what they are doing? Even if it is something that most people are not accustomed to. All right, Doc Rivers being here. They've had a relationship in the past. Did they have success when they were together? Yeah. In Boston, although Morey's role isn't what it is today, they've been together before. How much do you value a relationship that starts out on the right foot?
You know, and those are two people who I think are pretty aligned, Doc and Daryl Morey. They worked together in Boston way back when. Daryl tried to help the Houston owner, Tillman Fertitta, hire Doc Rivers when he left the Clippers, and Doc chose the Sixer job, obviously. And so they were anxious to work with each other, and so I think those two kind of together, you know, have a, you know, they're two people who wanted to work together and now, you know, try to figure out what is the formula to try to elevate the Sixer team back to where people thought it was headed, which was the very, very top of the East and maybe even the league. You know,
wow, the top of the league. Remember those days thinking the 76ers were going to be at the top of the league? Yeah, that was something, and it sure fell on its face. Look, when you look at having a relationship in your front office with your head coach and your president of basketball operations, you're off to a tremendous start. And just knowing that, one, they worked together before, and two, there were many instances where they were trying to get back together, specifically Morey trying to bring in Doc Rivers. I think that speaks volume of how Morey feels about Doc and what they can get accomplished together. He wouldn't go out and try and get him in the past if they didn't think that, hey, we can use this guy. Hey, this guy can be beneficial. Hey, this guy has intangibles that can be effective and be a factor in winning basketball in our organization. So the fact that there's been drive in the past to get together again and connect, I think that is very strong. And coming from a front office that was so dysfunctional and so embarrassing, having this in place is a good sign right from the start. Now, I need to tell you about my friends at DraftKings. DraftKings has brought their expertise to legal sports betting. It's a legitimate sports book based right here in the U.S., so you can rest assured that your funds are totally secure. DraftKings, America's top-rated sportsbook app, is safe, secure, and reliable. Deposit and withdraw at your convenience. Listen to this deal. It is tremendous. All new users have a chance to earn a sign-up bonus up to $1,000. Download the app and sign up with code Brodes, BRODES. Head to the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and check out all that they have to offer, including player props, live betting, and so much more. If sportsbooks are not yet available in your state, do not forget about the DraftKings Fantasy app, offering millions of dollars in total prizes every single week. And if you or someone you know has a gambling problem, crisis counseling and referral services can be accessed by calling 1-800-GAMBLER. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. So going back to the relationship between the two, I look at what a mess it has been here, and I've been very vocal, trying to make people aware of what was happening behind the scenes, whether it was Scott O'Neal, Cohen, Rucker. There were individuals up top of this franchise that should not have been, and they should not have been in their roles. And it seems they are starting to move out of that and going with more actual NBA people. And that's what needed to happen. And now that I'm seeing that change, that gets me excited. Although, you can look at the analytical approach from Morey and ask, well, how does that line up with getting more basketball people in here? Because that's something we heard out of Elton Brand during this offseason was, hey, we got to move on from the analytics to a degree. All basketball teams use analytics. All sports use analytics at this point. It can be a helpful tool. But last year and throughout the last couple of seasons, apparently it has intensified to such a brutal degree that they needed to go in another direction and go with more basketball guys. Yet, hold on a second. Here's Daryl Morey, who has been a very analytical guy from the jump. And I just mentioned Elton Brand. And when I heard Woj say this about Elton, I personally wasn't shocked, but it might shock everyone else or half the people out there. Listen to this, and it's not just about Elton. It's also about this organization. I have been stressing it for so long. You do not win. No matter what your talent is, no matter who your head coach is, no matter what the strategy is, you do not win if your franchise is ran so poorly. If your franchise is a nightmare, if there is a power struggle and somebody's making the decisions that knows nothing about the sport and they're just businessmen or they have another role and they have big decisions and they can put the hammer down, if those type of individuals have last say, you are absolutely screwed. Now, this is a combination of Elton Brand and what I just mentioned.
I will say this. I think Elton Brand, whatever he decides to do, whether he decides to stay, which I know he has the option of doing, or move on, he's going to be a really good GM in the NBA. He got thrown into it. Elton was thrown right into it, as you know, because there's a lot of voices in Philly. There's a lot of people who have say in personnel or have opinions and some ability to sway decisions. It is not an easy job, and I think he's going to run a team elsewhere if he decides not to stay in Philly or he stays here.
I like Elton Brand. I think he did get thrown into the fire, but I was screaming over and over and over again that you can't just say, it's unfortunate because he's in the GM chair, but you can't just say that all these contracts, Elton Brand, look at this horrendous contract, and that was the reaction from most. But I was saying, you can't just put it on him. This organization sucked over the last couple of years when it came to how it was structured. Did you hear his words? Did you hear what he had to say? You know how it is in Philly. There's a lot of voices in there. There's a lot of people making decisions in there. That's what happened. So while Elton Brand was in the chair and he's so easy to be the one to be mad at, it's not fair. It's not justifiable. And now it's pretty open and it's pretty known to a lot of sources how horrendous everything was. Because when you have the people up top who have no business, and I mean no business whatsoever, coming up with crucial decisions, you're going to fail. You won't succeed. You're going to be in a bad spot. You're going to have unhappy players. You're going to have unhappy coaches. And I honestly feel bad for Brett Brown because only Lord knows, only God knows what he had to put up with behind the scenes with a lot of that garbage. Now, I will say, there's still some of that garbage in this organization. You just have others who have been in this league and been around the NBA now being placed throughout the front office and throughout certain spots on this Sixers team as well, which takes away from the ugliness. But there's still some there. Unfortunately, some of them you can't get away from. But I got to tip my cap to Josh Harris because I am stunned. Truly, I am stunned that we are even having this discussion. This is national news. This isn't just, this is a nice piece. Daryl Morey, Doc Rivers, the coaching staff. This is national news when it comes to these type of moves that were made. Once again, there's still people involved that I'm not happy about. but they might not have the same say as they once did. Now that you get a man like Morey, he's not coming here unless he's able to flip you off if he's not happy with a certain statement or proposal or anything like that. All right, let's get into how the change should happen. Roster? Can you make a lot of moves? What can you do with some of these contracts?
Again, I think they're going to have to do some things around the edges.
Gotcha.
And they're going to have to work on how they improve the system and how they're going to coach these guys. But I don't think there's a quick magical fix for this Philly team. I think a lot of it initially is going to have to come from just internal changes, improvement.
And that was in regards to, what are you going to do with this roster? Al Horford, Tobias Harris. And there were multiple times where he brought up the fact that Tobias Harris had his best seasons under Doc Rivers. And I do think that should be noted. I do think it is definitely reasonable to say, hey, you have a guy who might have not have played his strongest basketball last year, but under Doc Rivers and the system that he runs with a ton of pick and rolls in the offense, which is essentially everybody in the NBA, Tobias Harris was effective. Tobias Harris had a role where he was shooting lights out from three, where he added more to his game than he ever had before, and it hasn't been the same here in Philly. Do you give Doc Rivers this roster for the most part and say, look, maybe it just needed a fresh set of eyes. Maybe it needed a new coach in here to set the fire under some of these players. Maybe the intensity of this whole entire new regime, which is very powerful. Gaining an entire new regime, talk about a slap in the face and a wake-up call to these players. Maybe this roster isn't as bad as what we saw last year. I don't know if I'm going down that road, though. That's almost getting sucked into these changes are the changes that will be the only difference maker. I think it starts here. Let me be clear. People were very upset with coach, roster, and that is important. Clearly, a front office without those pieces isn't going to get the job done. It starts here. This is the first step, but I also don't think that the roster is properly put together. I'm not going to get sucked into that road of, hey, just Doc Rivers and a new coaching staff is going to be the difference in where this team is going to go. There's still major flaws. You need shooting. You need to be able to space the floor more. You need to have a different identity out there on the court, or this won't work. So, I do think there needs to be changes, but as Woj said, look, internally and changing what your team is going to do out there on the floor and how you work with some of these guys and how you factor in that pick and roll, changes like that might be your best bet over some of the contracts, because that Al Horford deal, who is going to want that Al Horford contract? And I know a lot of people have been putting around a ton of articles and pieces of, hey, maybe the answer is Chris Paul. Well, funny I say that.
Chris Paul would be interesting given his history with both Doc Rivers and Daryl Morey. Remember, Daryl recruited him in free agency. Technically, it was a sign and trade.
Yeah.
And then moved him fairly unceremoniously to Oklahoma City. I think you know the history of Doc's relationship with Chris in L.A. Not great at the end, not great in the middle. And so I don't know. Now, listen, I've seen a lot of, like, you've been around sports and you've been around the NBA, and people can make up when there's a common interest of his talent and their need. But I don't know. You look and you say, what does Philly have hypothetically that appeals to a rebuilding Oklahoma City team? I'm not sure I see the fit.
I agree. I agree completely. That's always my debate with the people that are like, oh, go get Chris Paul. And there was always this somewhat debate about, why don't the 76ers trade Ben Simmons for Chris Paul? And I always laughed at that. Oh, yeah, let's trade Ben Simmons for Chris Paul. That makes a ton of sense. Let's go get one of the oldest guys in the NBA when giving up such a promising young guard in this league. That blew my mind, but people hate Ben Simmons that much because he doesn't shoot the basketball. Yet that is frustrating. Not enough for me to pass up on what he can be. His ceiling is possibly too high, where I will live and die with seeing if he reaches that ceiling or not. I would be interested if you can unload some of these contracts for Chris Paul. Yes, not getting rid of Ben Simmons, though. There's just no reason. My debate was always, there's no reason for these other teams to do it. Yeah, from a Sixers fan, guess what? It's very easy to say, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. They have a lot of young guys, and they can use an older veteran guy. It's just not reality, though. It's more of a reach. Like, why would a Thunder team need an Al Horford for that much money on their books? They're not ready to really go head on in this thing. They're acquiring all these first-round draft picks, and I know people try and make the argument that, hey, you know what you can do? You can use that veteran experience to help these young guys grow. I just don't see it being a reality. I know people try and convince themselves that, and I sort of mentioned that yesterday when I put up my initial reaction to the news of Daryl Morey. I went down that road, but I never really personally like to look at it that way. I just know that that is a way that people do view the Al Horford scenario of making a trade. I want to start diving into the Ben Simmons and the Joel Embiid side of things. So Ben Simmons on or off the ball when it comes to Doc Rivers?
It'll be interesting to see how they use Simmons. You remember Brett Brown in the bubble before Ben got hurt, had moved him to the power forward and had didn't have him as the primary ball handler. So it'll be interesting to see if that's what Doc comes into the season with. But they certainly, listen, almost every team in the league is always looking for shooting.
I need Ben Simmons to be on the ball. I didn't like any part of his game off the ball, whether it was the elbow thing, the elbow concept. He doesn't look natural. He doesn't look comfortable. Everyone screams, oh, he's a point forward. He's not. He's a point guard. And yes, I would like somebody else out there who can handle the ball as well. I'm not saying all he can do is that. I just don't like him in that 4 position. Do I want him to maybe be in the corner sometimes to take some of those threes because that's where he feels most comfortable? Yeah, but I would like to have him with the ball in his hands more times than not. And I know last year we're trying to convince ourselves that Shake Milton is this go-to guy with the ball in his hands next to Ben Simmons and all that. You need more than that. If you want to be a legit contender, I hate to break it to you, Shake Milton is not the guy that should be in your starting rotation. And then it goes back to you are somewhat screwed right now with roster construction. I don't know how much that you can possibly do. I like Ben being the screener. I think Ben is a good screener and a roller. I didn't like Ben at the 4 when he's sitting at the elbow, but maybe you can use him at the 4 when it comes to screening and rolling. But naturally, I want him being that guy, the guy with the ball in his hands, the guy that's there to use his vision and get his teammates open and to get his teammates 3-point looks. This team with Ben Simmons, he was leading the league in 3-point assists last year with one of the worst 3-point constructed teams I've ever seen in my life. How do you not value that? How? He has a skill set that opens up the damn floor. And analytically, you would think that that would be something that Daryl Morey looks at. And his eyes get all big. He's like, hold on a second. Maybe we're on to something here. When he's looking at, what do we do? When he's looking at maybe the roster and going, how can we be different? Sort of like what was said about the Houston Rockets and the Warriors. And okay, how can we be different? Well, how can we be different? Well, we have a point guard who doesn't shoot, but he does something very well. He can find those guys. How do we work with that? How can we maximize his ability? Interesting. How about this organization not moving on from Ben and Joel yet? Daryl Morey is a guy that is willing to go down that road, willing to make big splashes, and that is one of my cons, that he could be too far with one way and get rid of someone too soon. Very emotional, very reactionary. He is known to make a ton of trades. What if 1 year in, 2 years in, oh no, we're trading Ben Simmons? Well, how does this franchise view the two?
I think right now he's got 2 players in Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons that, when you're a rival GM, you covet getting players like that. Well, they have them, and I think their goal, certainly at least in the short term, is to continue to try to build around those 2 and find the right mix around them. And I think, certainly with a new coach in Doc Rivers, a formula there to try to find a way to maximize them.
That's what I love to hear. I love to hear keeping these two together. I'm not ready to move on. I need to see these two play with a new head coach, and I think this is the perfect scenario to see them play. Like, if you talked about a shakeup, a change of scenery, I don't think you can get more of a change of scenery than what you just brought in this entire offseason. So with that being said, I need to see Ben Simmons. I need to see Joel Embiid with a different atmosphere, with a different culture, with a new set of eyeballs watching them, with a new president of basketball operations in the mix, with this new, it's almost a new spotlight from the fans. And I'll be honest with you, it definitely brought some energy. If you kept things the same, or if you just brought in Doc Rivers with a couple new assistant coaches, yeah, there'd be more juice than if they didn't make any sort of change at all. But it wouldn't have been enough to where it is now. Like, I'm excited for this because I thought the major flaw with this organization coming into this new season was Joshua Harris and what was going to be done throughout the top. And it's not a natural conversation because you don't see these individuals, because you don't know what they do. But you see Brett Brown, but you see these players, and you see the product on the court. But the product on the court always relates to what's going on behind closed doors. So it was never easy to just naturally see. And I'll be honest, now that I'm starting to get in the business more and I'm starting to cover teams and I'm getting credentialed and I'm talking to people, what happens behind the scenes in all of these organizations, it's mind-blowing. If only more fans really knew some of the conversations that happen, some of the things that are hidden from everybody. It's crazy, and it almost sometimes ruins it, but this is the nature of the beast. This is billion-dollar corporations for a reason, and if you ever think about any billion-dollar corporation, million-dollar corporation, there's all kinds of shady stuff that happens behind the scenes that's it's not so natural to the eyes. Well, guess what? It shouldn't really surprise anyone that this is how it is in professional sports, but there's a big domino effect when things happen at the top and it continues to go down and down and down, and then boom, it explodes in everybody's face, and that's exactly what you saw happen from this 76ers team from an organizational standpoint this past year. It was very disappointing. It was very brutal. I thought at some point they would snap out of it, but it's not just the 76ers. And to be fair, I guess it doesn't really matter because I don't care about the Clippers. I don't care about other teams. I only care about the Sixers. But this isn't a random thing that just only happens here. Like, there's teams who have this mindset every year. Every single year, you hear people talk about teams heading into the season that can go dominate the league, and then they fall flat on their face, whether it's the Kyrie Irving Boston Celtics, or it's the Kawhi Leonard and Paul George Clippers, or it's the Philadelphia 76ers. I mean, there's teams every year that you expect to be better, and they can't live up to the expectations. And then there's plenty of teams, they're not going to be that great, and boom, they excel, and they're phenomenal, and who knows, they make a championship run, sort of like the Miami Heat did this year. It's just the nature of the beast based off of expectations and pressure, and that's what happened this year. I don't know where the fans are right now. I feel some think that these changes automatically will result in a championship-type team with the same roster, and I feel some recognize there is still a lot of work to be done, but this is clearly a step in the right direction from the franchise, and that's where I am now. But you hear it's going to be tough. The contracts are not easy to move. You lost a ton of your assets.
Listen, they invested a lot in Al Horford. You don't just say, well, we're going to move him on and we're going to get like that becomes a difficult contract to trade. And so you become limited in what you can do just because you want to do a trade,
right? Just
because you made a lot of trades. The one thing with the Sixers, they burned through assets. And by the way, like that's what happened in Houston at the end. They traded multiple picks and multiple pick swaps in the Russell Westbrook trade. And so their future there is not like it's fairly bleak in terms of being able to make moves. And so I don't think people should expect that Daryl's going to come in and there's some magic wand that's going to bring in players around, that they can go and land another great player, another star level player.
All right. So there you have it. It's not going to be easy. You burned a lot of your assets. It's not like you have a ton available. You have these players that are on brutal contracts. Teams aren't just going to be willing to take it all, and Daryl Morey's not going to be able to have this magic wand. That's essentially what I'm saying. It's like it's clearly a great step, but there are moves that still need to be made, and I just don't know if that's going to happen right now instantly at the top. Like, hey, here's the roster. All right, boom, we're ready. Now, he's probably going to be active. He's going to test the market. He's going to see what's available. But based off of burning a lot of those assets that you had, what Sam Hinkie was able to give you, and then with what some of those picks ended up becoming, a Landry Shamet here, right? Those type of pieces, getting rid of them. You're running out of assets. It's like awesome, but at the same time, it's frustrating that we're in this position because they were set up for so much success, and then boom, boom. And this will tell you where they really are. Like this regime here, this is it. This is it. This is your final go when it comes to the process and what you did. Like after this point, it's going to be a new switch as a whole. But to me, this still falls in the process category. And we'll see if it all works out. Before we see results, I would say that I'm intrigued from what they brought in and how they approached this during a pandemic. You got John Middleton, who's unwilling to go over the luxury tax. You have people afraid of spending a lot of money, and here comes Joshua Harris going, I don't care. Now, I don't know how to read this. Is this because he truly wants to win, or is this because he knew that the fan base was so lost, he had to make big explosive plays to make sure that they get sucked back in? Because I'll give him his credit. I think a lot of people got sucked back in because they were so damn shocked he went down these paths and made the proper phone calls that he had to make. But I don't know how to read it. I would imagine that some of it is for a selfish reason. He knows he can't lose the fan base because he needs people in the building. But look, that's the thing. People aren't going to the building. They're not going to have a season filled with 20,000 at the Wells. So knowing that, he was willing to do it. Now, they look at it as a long-term investment of, look, at some point we'll have fans. We need them there when it's there. So we got to sell to the fan base. We're going to be okay. It was ugly. We're going to be okay. Or does he truly value winning? Because he's been around the block when it comes to being an owner for multiple franchises. How much does he value the winning compared to how much does he value the money side of things? Owners need to care about money. They're billionaires for a reason. But there needs to be a mix. You need to care about both to be a successful owner. And he's not someone who relates with the fan base. He's just a guy. He's just a guy. He doesn't have that relatable style, and he doesn't care to because he has teams in all different cities. So he doesn't care. But he definitely cares about keeping the viewers engaged because without us, guess what? You're screwed. So before we end this episode of Sports Talk with Brodes is sponsored by Orbit Energy and Power. With over 20 years of experience in the industry, they are home to your solar experts in both residential and commercial projects. They are dedicated to making sure your project is completed easily and properly by using high-quality materials and trained professionals to get the job done right. They also provide water purification systems, backup energy services, battery storage, and more. So check out their information. It's all down below. Thank you all so much for listening, and I will see you next time.